Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 361, and today on the show I have a very special guest, the great Daniel McAdams. He is the director of the Ron Paul Institute and the co-host of the Ron Paul Liberty Report, Monday through Thursday, every week for, I don't know, Dan, has it been a decade now? I feel like I've been watching you guys for almost a decade on that show. So yeah, how long has it been? And, just tell people a little bit about yourself.
Sure, but yeah, we actually started the Liberty Report in April of 2015. I mean, it's hard to believe. Back then, there weren't as many podcasts and stuff around. Now there's a lot, which is great. It's terrific. So thanks for inviting me on, Kyle.
Absolutely. And I was talking to a libertarian friend of mine pretty recently, and I made a joke about how I've been listening to the Tom Woods show and the Ron Paul Liberty Report since there was a shortage of libertarian podcasts, and they started laughing like that was ever a thing. But it really was. There really was a time. And so, Dan, I just have, some things that are in the news right now that I really want to talk to you about. And a few things I think you'll probably have some insight on, particularly because of the time that you spent in Ron Paul's congressional office, particularly on foreign policy. And, from my perspective, what we've seen in the funding of Ukraine seems really wild to me. There's been very little oversight. Even for the Afghan war, there was an inspector general who was really looking at what was going on. There seems to be almost no oversight and very little interest in Congress in having any oversight at all. And not only that, but the administration is just finding money. Last year, they found this accounting error that freed up billions of dollars, and now they found $300 million, and they're going to send Ukraine more cluster bombs, and I'm pretty sure sending cluster bombs is against the law, too. And so, I'm curious as to what your current thoughts are on, the White House doing this, and where is Congress?
Yeah, Congress doesn't care at all. I mean, when they passed the initial, excuse me, the initial, what was it, just 100 billion, some a little bit of change. And Senator Paul objected and said, basically, he said, I can't stop the money. If you remember, Kyle, they had worked everything up to a frenzy. I mean, Putin was ready to be in our living rooms attacking us. Everything was worked up into a frenzy that I hadn't seen really since the beginning of the Iraq War. But Senator Paul knew that he wouldn't be able to block the money with the mood of the country, whipped up by the media. So we said, well, can we at least accompany this with some sort of inspector general to oversee the funds? And he was yelled at. He was, told he was unpatriotic. He's in the back pocket of Putin, et cetera, et cetera. So since that point, there has been no oversight. Now, the Pentagon claims that they have a mechanism for internal oversight within the Pentagon. They're keeping a good eye on things, and they can assure us that everything is accounted for. Not a single bullet has gone astray into the wrong hands. But this is a Pentagon that cannot be audited, that has never been audited, that cannot pass an audit. So it's a little difficult to put a lot of faith in them claiming that they're keeping a good eye on these weapons being sent over there.
And we have this phenomenon where the reports that have come out from the Pentagon have largely indicated that there's very little oversight. And what oversight there is not only insufficient, but not in any way procedural. It's just, kind of what the troops at this base are deciding is appropriate oversight is what they're doing. But that's not some sort of, entrenched Pentagon procedure. And so there's been this really interesting, I think, thing that's happened over really since October is the White House has really been pushing for another massive Ukrainian aid package, and it hasn't passed yet. And this is, I don't know, maybe the longest I've ever seen the war state really have to wait for something. And, I'm just wondering your thoughts on this, what is a now $95 billion aid package. It seems to me that eventually it's going to get a vote in the House and it has overwhelming support and will pass, but it hasn't happened yet. And again, you would think they're running out of money for this. At some point, it's going to become a real issue.
Pardon me, on the oversight issue. One of the things that's characterized the U.S. Activity in this proxy war, let's call it what it is, between Ukraine and Russia, is that the U.S. government has consistently taken everything the Ukrainians have said at face value. So when they ask the Ukrainians, are any of these weapons getting misplaced, getting sent, falling onto the black market, Ukraine says no, and the U.S. says okay. And this has been throughout this conflict. This has been the case. How many planes did you shoot down? Oh, we shot down 50 50 Russian jets. Oh, okay, no, we'll report it. It'll be on the news. So they've taken them for face value, where we know that they have a serious credibility problem. So that's just returning to the original question. But on the issue of the funding, it is a bit perplexing that the money hasn't gone through because, as you point out, there is very, very strong support in both parties for this money. The fact that it didn't go through in October, and every day that it doesn't go through, I think it makes it less likely that it'll go through. We have apparently Donald Trump is quoted talking to Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, saying not another penny for Ukraine. Trump is the presumptive nominee. The Republican Party, you would think, in the House, that barely controls the House, by a hair's breadth, that they would not go against a stated foreign policy of someone they expect to be the future president. It would show a lack of decorum. It would weaken the party. And, Kyle, as you know, when everything comes down to politics. So I think, it would be hard pressed. And then maybe that's where some of the hesitation on the part of Speaker Johnson. Initially, he wanted to score some brownie points by throwing a border control bill in there. Your listeners will all remember this. He was like, this is going to pass anyway, so I might as well get some Republican brownie points in here. Well, that didn't work out very well, and that's not even being discussed from the last report that we've heard about the new aid package. So the question is, what will happen? We're at a point now where Ukraine is essentially, universally, it's accepted that Ukraine is losing this war. Even a retired Polish general said something yesterday about it. It's obvious. Even the mainstream media is saying that they're losing the war. They'll have their own spin on it. But when that now has become accepted, that changes, I think, the calculus of things, if you think about it, because November is the target. November is the election. So the Biden administration, facing an inevitable collapse of Ukraine, the question is, do they really want the money or not? If they don't get the money and Ukraine collapses, they can say, look at these Republicans. They let Russia take over half of Europe. They wouldn't give us the money. They don't care about national security, and get some political bonus points from that. The Republicans, they don't want to send the money because of, I think, the Trump issue that I mentioned earlier. And they know that it's unpopular with the Republican voters. Big time if you look at recent polls. So, it's sort of now the money is now swirling in this weird political vortex. So I think there's a big question mark on it.
Okay. And I did want to ask you about Orban's remarks. I believe before you worked for Dr. Paul, you spent some time in Eastern Europe. And so at the start of the war, it seemed like there was a general trend of, excluding the US and the UK, the closer you moved towards Russia, the more antagonism there was and the more people wanted to support the war. And now it seems 2 years into the war, through a midst of cultural and economic issues and political issues, Zelensky and Kiev has really chafed almost all of their neighboring states, including Hungary. And so I was wondering, what do you make of Orban's remarks, but also, this kind of new dynamic where Poland, Hungary, Slovakia all have had issues with Ukraine and have curtailed their support to some extent.
Poland still suffers from a severe case of Russophobia, and Hungary has always had very strained relations with Russia as well. And as you point out, I did live in Hungary. In fact, I worked for Viktor Orban's party, and I knew him fairly well when I lived over there. But Hungary, Orban has definitely carved out a unique foreign and domestic policy in Europe, and he's been at odds with the European Union and with NATO because of it. He is first of all, he's rejected all of the refugees that all of the other countries accepted, and they're having problems with now. And he's not gone along with the foreign policy because he rightly finds it to be ridiculous. And he's certainly anything but a Russophile, or a Putinophile. But he's more of a hard-headed realist like we used to have in the U.S. So, but you're right. Really, the last man out is the Czech Republic, which is still sort of mired. They've got their president was a former general. He was also a member of the Communist Party and an informant. So not a nice guy, but he knows where is bread is buttered. All the former communists in those days in that area, they all became the best allies of the U.S. because they're used to being taken care of as client states. It was the Soviet Union, and then when the U.S. took over, there's plenty to be made in terms of position and profit by being a client of the U.S., and so that's what a lot of them did. So anyway, with the exception of the Czech Republic, you are seeing a definite shift. I mean, Fico in Slovakia, I mean, he came up as a sort of traditional leftist, then liberal, and now he's almost in the vein of I mean, this is not a good comparison, but like a Sarah Wagenknecht in Germany, where it's the left that is bucking the trend of the so-called left, like the Greens in Germany, for example, like Baerbock and what have you. So yeah, there definitely is a shift going on in Western Europe, and I think you're going to see it. I mean, in Central Europe, and I think you're going to see it move westward. We have German elections coming up. We had elections in the Netherlands that produced a skeptic, but it's Dutch politics are much more complicated than that, unfortunately.
Right. Well, talking about moving west, it does seem that, to some extent you may be right. And the German government, at least the chancellor, seems somewhat skeptical of getting too much more involved in this war. But interestingly enough, one of the leaders who was, I think, maybe the last Western leader to have a sit down with Putin, the French president, has now become the most hawkish, making several statements in recent days saying that France is willing to send troops to Ukraine, or I guess not willing to, but it may be necessary, and making some very hawkish statements that would put the NATO in one of its major states in a direct conflict with Russia. So I was wondering what you made of these comments, because it seems insane to me, is my initial reaction. And it must be some kind of rhetorical bluster, or maybe I'm just being too optimistic.
Well, I think there's an element of European politics as well, because there's been a lot of friction between Scholz and Macron. But there's been a perception that France is not doing enough. The Germany is not doing the right thing. The Germany is not sending the Taurus missiles. So there's a lot of, I mean, this happens when a stupid policy becomes evidently stupid to more and more people. You start seeing the proverbial rats leaving the sinking ship. And I think Macron's move in this regard is to try to one-up Scholz, who's hesitant on the Taurus missiles, for a number of reasons. The stated reason is that they would have to have Germans operating them from within Ukraine, and that would make Germany a party to the war. Well, maybe they're essentially already a party to the war. But the other is that the Taurus, and I'm not a technical expert when it comes to military equipment in any stretch of the imagination, but from what I've read, the Taurus missiles feature some upgrades from the like for the Storm Shadows, for example, on which they're based. There's the British missiles. There are some upgrades that are that the Germans consider secret, proprietary, and they don't want them getting out. So that's another reason I've heard that they don't want to send the Taurus missiles. But you're having a situation where they're all at each other's throats now with this failed policy, and not only a failed policy, Kyle, but a failed continent. I mean, a continent that has basically sacrificed its prosperity on the altar of a stupid neocon Victoria Nuland idea to take out Russia. And so now they're all going to be stewing in their juices.
Yeah, well, in the economic war against Russia has maybe been the biggest Western failure. I mean, pouring all those weapons into Ukraine certainly costs a lot of money, and for us taxpayers is a big deal, but they've really hurt their own economies by trying to break away from Russia and accelerated de-dollarization quite a bit. Now, Dan, I was wondering how desperate you think the situation is. And the thing that really set off my alarm bell was not only the Marcon comments, but the Senator Grant comments when he went to Ukraine and says that Ukraine needs to pass a new conscription law and draft more young Ukrainian men to throw into this meat grinder. That seems, I mean, that's a dark thing to ask anybody to do.
I think he's maybe the worst. He has to be the worst. He's very close to being the worst. Crenshaw is bad too, but he's got to be one of the worst. The thing is, and I pointed it out on the Liberty Report, and I give all credit to Bernard at the Moon of Alabama website, because he looked into the demographics of Ukraine, And one of the reasons, see what Senator Graham says, I can't believe that they're not drafting people until they get to be age 27. This is ridiculous. You got to draft them young, bring them young. But the reality is that the demographics of Ukraine are such, and you can your viewers can go to a Moon of Alabama story a couple of days ago where he takes a chart from Ukraine. But essentially what happened is that there are no people from 18 to 24. There are no men. You have a big group of retired people, and you have a slightly less large group of young people. But this was an era where there just weren't a lot of children being born. And so you have basically there are none. There's no one left to fight this war. And I was reading some articles this week about, just villages in Ukraine that are just devoid of men. There are no men left anywhere. So it's a fantasy on the part of someone who is extremely ill-informed, like Lindsey Graham. All members of Congress are ill-informed, with very few exceptions. Thomas Massie, I think, is well-staffed and well-informed. I think Senator Paul is, and a few others are. But more or less, all of the rest of them are extremely ill-informed. They're incurious, unserious people, and that's why they'll come up with some cockamamie schemes like this. That one and the other one I really like is, well, let's not call it a loan. Let's not call it a gift. Let's call it a loan. They're going to pay us back. Which is, it's like, it'd be like loaning money to Hunter Biden, in amidst crack dealers or something. They're not. What are they going to pay it back with? They have no GDP. Everything is gone, and they're going to lose the eastern part of the country, which was the industrialized part of the country in the first place. So, it's just, ill-informed people, unfortunately, ruling over us.
Right. So I think that's going to be surprising to some people, right? That, I guess not maybe my audience or your audience, but a lot of Americans assume that our members of Congress are some of the most intelligent, and even if not maybe the most intelligent, certainly the most well-formed. They have, access to more informations. They could probably talk to the Pentagon anytime they want. So why is it that so many members of Congress are so ill-informed? I mean, you spent it was a while ago, but you spent a decade or so on Capitol Hill, so you might have some insight on this.
Well, theoretically, they can call the Pentagon or the White House, but the great story of the late Walter Jones, who was a representative from North Carolina, who was originally very much in favor of the Iraq War and was famous/infamous for being so patriotic that he wouldn't let us call French fries because the French weren't with us in the war. Well, he got a realization. He had a wake-up call, which is that he did listen to the Pentagon. He went to the classified briefings, and then he realized very quickly, as he did a little bit of his own research, that they were lying through their teeth. Every single thing they said to him was a lie. So even someone trying to get informed would be lied to by the administration that had politicized the war, and as we know now, politicized the intelligence, stovepiped the intelligence to make it look like Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction because they wanted a war. And they would do anything they could do to get that war. And so you don't have any source of information there. And the other, and this is anecdotal, but and I've told it before, but I was a staffer for Dr. Paul on Foreign Affairs, and he was on the Foreign Affairs Committee. So we would go to committee briefings all the time. That's what you did. And so all the members would have a staff with the staffers seated behind them or near them. And so I was in the unique position to watch all the other staffers and see what they were reading. How are they informing themselves? And I am not kidding you, to the person, they were reading only the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, New York Times. Nobody was reading any alternative sources, And I would go up there. This is the early 2000s. I'd be there with my stack of antiwar.com, LouRockwell.com, Counterpunch, all of these alternative to get the real picture. And so when you informed like that around people that are absolutely not informed, they look at you as if you have another head growing out of your body. Well, no one else is saying this. How could it be true? So you really have a crisis, a crisis of intelligence in our political leadership. And I think it's just gotten worse. You're right. It's been 10 years since I've been in the House, and it's gotten a lot worse since then. I mean, good grief. You've seen some of the stories. Some of these people, even people that are otherwise somewhat decent, there's no decorum on the House floor at all, or in the House.
Yeah. Well, just speaking of Senator Graham, I remember after, I think it was in 2017 when the 4 U.S. soldiers were killed in Niger, and he said he wasn't even aware that the American soldiers were in that country. And, even at that point in time, I kind of assumed that, okay, maybe not every last congresswoman. I'm sure like Cori Bush isn't up to date on wherever U.S. troops are across the region, but Lindsey Graham seems to be the one of the most interested in war. And so you would think that this guy probably is, has like a map in his office and is constantly playing games, moving soldiers around, and is, really into everything going on. But apparently that's not the case. And even these ultra hawkish members of Congress are just, kind of a slave to the headlines too, and just advocate for war wherever it pops up in the news.
Yeah, instead of his reaction being, I had no idea there were troops there. They're not authorized. We're going to hold hearings immediately and get to the bottom of this. It's, I didn't know we had troops there. Let's double them. That's the reaction. And we've been, I was mentioning on the show today, we've been bombing Yemen. We've been at war with Yemen for what, 3 or 4 months now? Congress hasn't said a thing, hasn't demanded a hearing. There have been a few members, I think, who've tried to get a what's it called, where you get signatures and try to get a bill on the floor, discharge petition on it on the floor. But very, very few. I mean, there's a lack of interest. Oh, we're at war here. Oh, okay. Oh, we just bombed Somalia again. Okay. There's no separation between the state of war and the state of peace now. It's just sort of a constant state of war. And as long as it doesn't affect us outwardly, nobody's bothered by it.
Yeah. I mean, I remember 2 weeks after the bombing in Yemen started, it was Tim Kaine, I believe, who was Hillary Clinton's running mate, a fairly prominent Democrat, who was asking questions about how could you be bombing Yemen every day and how is this not a war? But then there was no follow up whatsoever. Like everybody just lost interest and moved on. It's unbelievable how this happens and how everything has unfolded with all the support for Israel and just how little objection or any oversight or questions there have been. I mean, there's the Leahy laws and all other kinds of, statutes that are supposed to prevent U.S. weapons and military aid from going to countries committing war crimes. And here we have the International Court of Justice, who's led by an Obama political appointment, saying that there's a genocide going on in Gaza, and there's no interest in the Congress in doing anything.
And when the American people, especially the young people, start getting interested in it, and they don't go to the New York Times, they go to TikTok and they start seeing what's happening there. Well, we got to ban TikTok. What the hell is going on? These kids are off the reservation. I mean, there's even that intercepted audio of Greenblatt, the head of ADL, saying we've got a TikTok problem. We've got to deal with this issue. And lo and behold, the House dealt with the issue. They passed that ridiculous law trying to ban it. So I think that the lesson here, Kyle, is that we're getting off the reservation. Americans are no longer buying what's force-fed them, the younger generation particularly. And I think that's very good news for us. But they're still trying to control the information and using blunt force. But even with the, as you say, with the Yemen bombing, well, they were supposed to be terrified. As soon as we threw a couple missiles over there, they were supposed to wave the white flag. Excuse me, but they didn't. They did the opposite, in fact. They continued to accelerate. They continued to expand their operations very, very successfully. If you look at a map of the ships in the Red Sea right now, there are no dots. Nobody's going there. So we've lost our ability. The U.S. has lost its ability to deter other nations, not because, as the neocons would say, Joe Biden is weak, but because the use of deterrence has been so overused, sanctions have been so overused that they've lost any kind of sting that they may have once had. And the rest of the world knows that now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to ask you a little bit more about the TikTok ban. For people who don't know, Dan has a great newsletter that he's putting out, and I'm sure you could sign up at it at the Ron Paul Institute website, which, by the way, a couple months ago, you put out this fantastic new website. It's a really nice looking website. So everybody be sure to go and check that out. They run a lot of great featured articles there on the front page. But Dan, this article, TikTok Totalitarians, we actually have running today at antiwar.com, which you initially again put out as one of your new newsletters. And this seems like I mean, this was crazy how fast this bill came up. You know, there's this idea that there's this massive gridlock in Congress. Republicans and Democrats don't get along on anything. They can't get anything done. And here, within a couple of weeks, we have this tit-tot bill that blistering speed makes it through the House. And this seems like a major step in the government oversight of online communication.
Yeah, they can't even, they haven't even been able to thus far get the spending bills passed that they need, which is their number one job. Yet they can take this time out, as you say, at lightning speed, at lightning speed, to attempt to ban a website. And Thomas Massey did a great job. His staff, he's got to have a pretty good staff. I know a couple of them, they're smart people, but he's also very smart, and he reads everything too. He dove into that bill, and he saw what was wrong with it. And it's very simple. He called it a Trojan horse, and he's absolutely right. It gives the president the power to ban a website. I mean, that's insane. If you think about it, here we are sitting in America, and you have one guy in the White House who basically can flip the switch off of the First Amendment whenever the hell he wants to, because he says, well, this website is under the influence of a foreign power, either directly or indirectly. So I'm switching it off. I mean, it's insane, because if you think about it, we talked about it on the show too, and I probably talked about it in the article. That can happen to any of us. Antiwar.com. Your guys are not towing the line on this stuff. You must be foreign controlled. And I'm sure you probably heard it, Kyle, from neocons. Oh, you guys are foreign controlled. Oh, Ron Paul Institute, you guys are, Putin's. How much does Putin pay you to put this out? You know, it literally gives the president the ability to do that to TikTok. It's unbelievable. And the Republicans who gave Biden the power to do that are stupid. And the Democrats who give a President Trump the power to do it in the future are stupid, because he will use it as well. You know, any president is going to love that power, to ban websites. Or, and I wrote about it in the article, to be like, Vito Corleone and have a gun, to someone's head. You're going to sell this to me, and the price is going to be this. And that's what Mnuchin did, the former Treasury Secretary under Trump. He said, oh, they're going to force him to sell it? I've got some buyers that might be interested in this, says Mr. Goldman Sachs. So it's a dark day for the U.S. that this passed, and it's just indicative of the frenzied, like ADHD attitude that people in Congress have. Oh, look, a squirrel. That's literally how they think.
Yeah, well, especially when I remember 4 years ago when Donald Trump was floating this as in his last year in office, and the Democrats were going on about how stupid this was and how this was going to turn Gen Z and millennials against Trump. And here Trump is against it, and the Democrats and President Biden are pushing it as hard as they can, as fast as they can. It's wild how quickly things could change in government, and so much of current American politics, a lot seems to be based on what Israel wants, but another major driving force just seems to be Democrats reacting against President Trump.
Yeah, they're having a panic attack. They're seeing a Trump presidency in the horizon, and they're flipping out, which, I don't get. Trump drives me crazy for different reasons. He drives me crazy because he's not as bad as they say he is. He's not going to take us out of NATO. He's not going to, flip off the EU. He's not going to do any of the stuff. I don't know why. He's not going to. He's not going to pull out of Ukraine. I don't think. Maybe he will, but he's not anywhere near the bad guy that he's being made as by the Democrats. It's just so bizarre. I wish he was half as bad as they say he is.
Yeah, one of the really wild things about the Biden presidency is how much it looked like the nightmare of the liberals of what they thought the Trump presidency was going to be. Yeah. Oh, he supports dictators. Look at Zelensky and Netanyahu. Oh, he's going to isolate the U.S. from the rest of the world. Look at what Biden's support of Gaza has for Israel's destruction in Gaza has cost the U.S. on the international stage. Even the UK doesn't vote with us at the UN Security Council anymore. That's a wild development. And this isolation has all come under Biden. And so before we wrap up here, I just want to ask you, almost every day it seems more and more likely that Trump may be returning to office here. Now, the deep state has a lot of tricks to pull out, and they're going to be desperate to try to stop them. So I don't want to present this as a foregone conclusion, but much more so than a year ago, I do think it's likely that Trump will be the president 1 year from now, Dan. And so during his first administration, I think myself, much like you, just felt that he wasn't focused enough on particularly foreign policy issues, didn't have the follow through, but most importantly, he put the wrong personnel in place. Now, maybe the one like bright spot, if you wanted to say maybe there's something about Trump, was he put Douglas McGregor in charge of quite a bit at the end of his administration. And imagine a country with Douglas McGregor as Secretary of Defense would, I mean, that would be huge. Now, of course, Donald Trump is still the president, Donald Trump, so things could go different ways. But do you have any hope that another Trump administration would be better than the first?
I always have hope, but I have a lot of fear too. From everything that I know, the Trump people aren't even talking to the colonel anymore. And they should be, because now the SEC definitely not work because you need to have a Senate confirmation. He's got a lot of enemies. Anyone who's smart in the military or in Washington has got a lot of enemies. But, what about National Security Advisor? That's a very powerful position. It doesn't need to have the Senate approval for that. But something like that would send a very good signal. But I mean, to be honest, I fear, a Lindsey Graham. I mean, I would not be shocked if tomorrow he said Lindsey Graham is going to be my Secretary of Defense. Because just his stuff, it just is so off the wall. He doesn't seem to have any guiding principles, and it's very, very disturbing.
Right. And he doesn't seem to remember the people who have burned him all the time either. The Michigan Senate race, Justin Amash, I think he picked Mike Turner. That's who he picked over him, the Never Trumper. And so, things like that just really make you worry that he's going to put the wrong people in the wrong positions. Now, I will say the one bright spot about McGregor, even if they don't like him, we're kind of past the point of congressional approval needed for these positions. There hasn't been a lot of turnover in the Biden administration, so it hasn't been an issue. But people sit in acting positions for months, if not years, all the time. So, just stick them in there and have the Congress hold up. You just don't have to have a vote, and it'll be fine, at least for some time. So anyways, Dan, any last comments to make? If not, let people know where they can find everything that you do. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thanks so much for having me on, Kyle. I really enjoyed our conversation. The Ron Paul Institute is ronpaulinstitute.org. And thanks for your kind comments about our website. We try not, I love Anti-War because they publish a lot of stuff, and that's great. And it really helps us. We talk about you guys every day on the show. We try to just pick a couple of things for people every day. So, but you can subscribe for free to updates to the Ron Paul Institute if you go to the website. And also the Ron Paul Liberty Report is every Monday through Friday. Monday through Thursday are generally foreign policy and civil liberties, and Friday is economics. So that's live at noon Eastern time. So love to have any of your viewers join us as well.
Yeah, I have to imagine anybody in my audience has probably at least listened to a few episodes, but if you haven't, the Ron Paul Liberty Report, along with, this show, Dave DeCamp's Anti-War News, the Scott Horton Show, and Judge Napolitano Show are really the indispensable libertarian foreign policy information show. So Dan, again, thank you so much. It's a real honor for me to have you on the show. As I said, I guess it's been about 9 years that I've been listening to you and Dr. Paul. Well, Dr. Paul for far longer than that, probably another 5 or 6 years before that. But it's great having you here, and I've appreciated all of your analysis over the years and what you brought on the show today.
Thank you, Kyle.